Greetings everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a topic and a franchise that gets no shortage of love on the internet, and that of course is Star Wars. Now with all the video essays in existence about Star Wars, I'm sure you're probably asking yourself, why do we need another one? Well, what I'm hoping to do with this video is something a little bit different. I want to ask a very simple question, and that is, what is Star Wars? But I'm not talking about defining the story. Star Wars, of course, is a science fantasy epic. It has aliens and spaceships and blasters and droids, mystical monks with laser swords. We're all very much aware of that, but what I'm asking with the question of what is Star Wars is looking more at the franchise as a whole and the meta sense of what it represents. So rather than be a critique of individual movies or television shows, what I want to do is look at the brand as a whole and the business angle of what Star Wars represents. Now professionally, I'm a project manager, a consultant, and a facilitator. I work with a lot of different organizations, large and small, and one exercise I like to do with all of my clients is to take a few moments to ask ourselves, who are we as an organization, who are we trying to serve, and how well are we connecting with that target audience? It's a good thing to do to make sure that everybody is on the same page, we're all working towards the same goals, and we can measure how effectively we're being and serving our audience. It doesn't matter if you provide a product or a service. At the end of the day, you are trying to reach a certain group of people in order to better serve them, and hopefully, if you do so well, those customers keep coming back to you. It generates profit for the organization. It sustains your organization so that you can continue to do the great work that you're doing. With Star Wars, it's really no different. It's an entertainment company, Disney, Lucasfilm. Ultimately, they have to at least make a profit in order to fund future projects. So it's in their best interests to know who they are as an organization, who their target customer is, and how well they're reaching them. The same questions apply regardless of what industry you're in. So we're going to be taking a closer look at that, at the values that the brand represents, how those values may or may not have changed over time, and what it means for Lucasfilm going forward. Now I realize that's a pretty lengthy intro, but if you ask my mother, I'm sure she would say, well, he's always late to everything anyway, so let's just get this show on the road.
This is where the fun begins.
Now, full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Star Wars fan. I've seen the entire Skywalker saga in theaters and the majority of the other Lucasfilm Star Wars projects, exceptions being a few seasons of the Clone Wars animated series, some of Star Wars Rebels, and The Bad Batch. And I've seen everything else that Disney Lucasfilm has released, some good, some bad. We won't get into too much of that right now, maybe save a little bit of that for later. But really what I want to focus on is that from its inception, Star Wars has become probably the most successful franchise in history per product. And what I mean when I say per product is if you consider all the revenue that was generated and all the merchandise that was created in the 80s and early 90s, the bulk of it was derived from 3 films. It was the original trilogy that gave us the inspiration for a lot of the things that were able to be brought to the market. Some of those direct in the forms of characters, ships, locations, other things that were pulled directly from the films, but also it spurred a lot of imagination and a lot of creativity around this universe that George Lucas introduced us to, and that came in the form of expanded universe novels, comic books, video games, toys, apparel, accessories, a wide range of merchandise available for purchase. That fueled the sustainability of Lucasfilm to allow George to be able to do additional things down the road, which we'll get into in just a minute. Now, earlier I mentioned core values, and I think it's important to take just a moment to define what I mean by that. Anytime you go to buy a product, that product is going to have different features, and the features will translate into direct benefits to you. How those features help you will factor into your purchasing decision, but there are other values associated with the product or the manufacturer that may come into play. Let's say you need to buy a skillet to cook your breakfast. When you start searching around for skillets, you're going to find dozens of different choices in terms of size, shape, color, other things that are going to distinguish one from the next. What you need to decide is which one is best suited for what you need to do. You know right away that you want a non-stick surface, so that's going to eliminate some of your choices right there. Maybe there are 2 people for whom you need to cook breakfast, not just yourself, so size is going to come into play. Maybe the shape in terms of how much food is going to be able to hold at one time or how evenly it's going to cook. All of these features will translate into direct benefits to you. It's the right size that I need for the number of people that I'm cooking breakfast for. It's the right shape for what I need to do. That nonstick surface is one thing that I really need to have. So the one that has all those features combined to provide you the most direct benefit is likely the one that you're going to purchase. However, there are instances where other factors come into play. Let's say you want a round skillet with a certain diameter that's non-stick, and you find 4, 5, 6 different options from different manufacturers that you could purchase. How do you know from that point which one to buy? One thing you might do is take a look at the companies that make these skillets. Where is the skillet made? Maybe you want to buy one that's made in America in order to support domestic manufacturing. Maybe one of these companies really touts how it's environmentally friendly, and that factors into your decision. Maybe one has a reputation for treating its employees really well. These different things about the company may or may not influence your decision to buy a particular skillet. So it's not just the features of the skillet itself and the direct benefit that it brings to you. Sometimes those core values of a company may weigh in to which one you choose to buy. Now, when it comes to core values, every organization has them whether they're truly cognizant of them or not. They're the driving principles that influence how you make decisions, how you treat your employees, how you treat your customers, and they can factor into the products that you make. It doesn't matter if you're in construction, consulting, charitable work, or entertainment. There are certain values that guide how you do the things that you do, and Star Wars is no exception. What we find with Star Wars is there are consistent values that were presented in the themes of the stories that also consistently were exhibited in different stories that George Lucas told. These are things like overcoming adversity, good versus evil, perseverance, heroism, integrity, redemption. Those values align with a vast majority of moviegoers because those are principles that most of us can identify with and enjoy and make us feel a little bit better about ourselves. So the values that we saw in Episode 4, A New Hope, carried through into Empire Strikes Back as well as Return of the Jedi, and that was kind of the foundation for Star Wars of what we knew within the original trilogy. Again, many things that audiences related to, identified with, or aspired to, and made them feel better, either through being able to personally identify with the story or at least that form of escapism of what things could be like. It was a very optimistic view of the world through this galaxy far, far away. And that carried us over pretty much for almost 2 decades from when we got the first film in 1977. By the time we get to the late 90s, we got the special edition in theaters. That was very exciting, quite frankly, as a moviegoer, because for many of us, that was the first time we got to see Star Wars on the big screen. Up until that point, it had been on our small home television sets on VHS. So that was truly an immersive experience, being able to see that in theaters. Right on the heels of that, we got the prequel trilogy beginning in 1999 with The Phantom Menace. And those 3 films really fueled the enthusiasm for Star Wars, not only for many of us who had been fans for many years, but also for a new generation of fans. Prequels, I'll save my opinion of those for another video. Pros and cons for sure, but at least we got an opportunity to see the origin story of Anakin Skywalker, which helped fill in some gaps from what we were told about Darth Vader in the original trilogy. And a key point to that is that the core values of the original trilogy are also very much present in the prequel trilogy. We still have good versus evil. We still have the perseverance, the overcoming adversity. Now, of course, it's a tragic tale, so it's not necessarily a happy ending, but it's very clear to us in the prequels who we're supposed to root for and who we should be rooting against. The very clear establishment of who's on the light side of the Force, who's on the dark side, light good, dark bad. Pretty common in what we'd been told thus far within Star Wars and how this universe operates. So there was consistency there. Different types of stories that George was trying to tell with the prequels, and I respect him not wanting to just wash, rinse, repeat, but rather try to give us something new. But even in telling these different styles of stories, he still maintained the same core values throughout. So it maintained the fan base, it actually expanded the fan base with new Star Wars fans, and really built upon the foundation that he already had. So things are really riding high for Star Wars. We've got 2 different trilogies out there. You've got fans of both, fans of one, not the other. Some nice, healthy discourse amongst the fan base of which ones they like more. But there's that commonality of those core values tying us all together to where at the end of the day, maybe I like Anakin, maybe I prefer Luke in terms of which one's the better hero, but it doesn't really matter because they're ultimately still working towards the same thing. You could argue Luke was successful where Anakin failed. Anakin got his redemption in Return of the Jedi, which makes it all work out. But there's a lot of fun debate and sparring back and forth about the different characters, themes, and plots of those 6 films because you have the same core values that we all enjoy and all make us fans of the franchise. Then in 2012, Disney announces that they're buying Lucasfilm. And this was exciting news because you have to realize up to this point, we'd not had a new Star Wars film in roughly a decade. So it's like, oh, could this mean more Star Wars? And yes, there was the announcement immediately that we're going to be doing Episode 7. And not only Episode 7 to follow on Return of the Jedi, we are bringing back Han, Luke, and Leia. So for fans, we were super excited about the prospect of this. Shocking to say the least because it was something we never thought could happen, but here we go. We're all set up. We're ready to do it. So we all ran into the theater, ready to check out Episode 7. The Force Awakens. I'm not really sure what that means, but you know what? It's new Star Wars, and it's got familiar characters. It's got some new stuff, too. Let's go check it out. And a lot of us walked out of the theater thinking, all right, yeah, that was pretty good. And I personally was really I really just enjoyed Episode 7 on my first viewing, watched it a couple more times afterwards, and just thought, yeah, it's a good film. It's got a lot of good stuff going for it. It's got some familiar faces. It's got some new faces. It's a nice bridge from one generation to the next, so we're kind of carrying things through. Kylo Ren was an interesting villain. I really liked kind of his character, that he wasn't just as stoic as Darth Vader. He had a lot of depth to him. And of course, he had the cool mask and the red lightsaber that was used to kill off the elder member of the team in front of the orphan from the desert before they blew up the Death Star. Wait a minute. What the? So yes, in retrospect, Episode 7 was maybe not as original as we all thought that it was right out of the gate. Basically a rehash of the plot of Episode 4, but then you say, okay, you know what? That's all right. You need a familiar foundation to bring people back into the franchise, get them excited again, and then through the course of the next 2 movies, we can try to do some other things. And then we got The Last Jedi. Now, there's not much I can say about The Last Jedi that hasn't already been said. I have plenty of criticisms of that film. It got a lot of things wrong. If I'm to say anything positive, the one thing that I appreciated on first viewing was the fact that at least it tried to take the tried and true themes and core values of Star Wars and say, you know what? Let's try to inject something new into this franchise just to kind of shake things up. And they did so tactfully in the sense that they had some new concepts that they brought in through Kylo Ren, the villain, to say, forget the past, kill it if you have to, no more light, no more dark, forge a new path, and let's just forget the traditional way that we've always done things. It's a great position for the villain to take to try to tempt our protagonist, and wisely, the protagonist rejects this new philosophy and says, no, it's not how we're going to do things. We're going to stick to what we know, what works. I want to be a good person. I'm staying with the light, etc., etc. So it was executed fairly well, all things considered. They didn't just have Rey be the character to come in and say, you know what, we're just going to throw in the trash everything that we've already done before just to try to do this new thing for the sake of being different. We're not even going to get on the topic of subversion. That's been covered ad nauseum, and there are lots of things I could say about Rian Johnson, but we're not going to go there today. The one thing that did not work about what they were trying to do in that respect is that these new themes were introduced through various characters that were done at the expense of story and lore. And so it really broke a lot of what came before it. It did a terrible job of setting up what could come after it. And so it really derailed the franchise in a lot of ways. Not much else I can really say about that without going into a 2-hour explanation, so we're going to save that for another time. That took us to Episode 9, which was very much just a hodgepodge of plot and story. Everything but the kitchen sink being thrown back in to try to salvage what was introduced in 7, torn apart in 8. Other things that were introduced in 8. How do you make sense of all this mess? And that's exactly what we ended up with. It tried its best to connect dots that were too far apart. You can only do so much with what you have to work with, right? So Not much to say about The Rise of Skywalker other than I hate the title and I hate the last line of the film, and we're just not going to go there. What we did see throughout this new trilogy, though, we had the core values of the original trilogy that carried through into the prequels. What was interesting about the Disney Lucasfilm Star Wars trilogy, the sequel trilogy, is the fact that we saw those themes start to be pushed aside for the sake of other themes that were being introduced. And of those, these were things such as intersectional feminism, gray morality. You don't need good or bad, or maybe there is no such thing, and there's just something that exists in between. Um, Not what we're used to as Star Wars fans, and I'm not saying that I'm opposed to anything different. You just have to be very careful in how you execute that. And it started off pretty much with the introduction of Rey. What we've all heard from behind the scenes is that essentially Kathleen Kennedy made Rey her self-insert, and her whole goal was we need to replace Luke Skywalker as the hero of Star Wars, and we're just going to introduce someone who's even bigger and better and more perfect that will just replace Luke in the minds of the fans and be the new celebrated hero going forward. And oh, by the way, she's female. Just like the Force, apparently, which is a very odd decision to make. I'm not sure why you would want to do something divisive and polarizing to your fan base, but there you have it. So with each subsequent project, we saw more and more examples of the strong female protagonist, able to do everything right on the first try, doesn't need help from anybody else, just surrounded by supporting characters to remind that female hero of just how amazing she's always been. All she has to do is believe in herself. And this happened through pretty much everything that we've seen through Disney Star Wars. If you look at all the different projects that have been released, it just continues in a very escalating pattern of how these themes have been introduced and used to replace the core values that many of us came to know and love. And you can see the difference in values from what George Lucas gave us to the values that were given to us by Disney just when you look at each subsequent project. You had Rogue One, Solo, a Star Wars story, The Mandalorian Seasons 1, 2, and 3, The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, Ahsoka, and all of this has culminated most recently in The Acolyte. And we were already getting trailers for Skeleton Crew. Now this brings us to a very interesting point in the history of the franchise because things have been changed so dramatically from what we got in 1977 to The Acolyte. As far as that show is concerned, it's a real mess thematically, from an editing standpoint, an acting standpoint, and especially a writing standpoint. But what we have with The Acolyte, at this point, the Jedi are branded as evil or incompetent. Characters flip-flop from good to bad and back again. Lightsabers are apparently mood rings now. It's an incoherent mess of a plot with themes that don't resonate with the average Star Wars fan. And that's important because, again, it's the values of the product or the company as a whole that you identify with as a customer that makes you want to provide repeat business. The values have been changed so drastically from 1977 that fans of the original trilogy don't recognize Star Wars as a brand anymore. Because what I came to expect from Star Wars in terms of the themes of the story are now very, very different. Those aren't necessarily themes that I personally enjoy or identify with, so I'm much less interested than I used to be. Now, one important point I want to make with all of this is that if you're a longtime fan of Star Wars and you're finding that these more recent projects don't really resonate with you as a fan, that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person or a fake fan. It's because you've enjoyed the themes of Star Wars for years and years, and you have certain expectations of what you want to see in the stories of Star Wars. And contradicting basic foundational things like the Jedi are good, there's a dark side of the Force, that's bad, and we start saying, well, no, actually, we're going to flip that around, and let's not think of it that way anymore, it would make sense why longtime fans would say, now, wait a second, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think that I like this. Let me give you a good example. Let's say that you and a friend enjoy going to this local steakhouse every single week. It's a chance for you to grab dinner together, catch up, have a good time, and you've been doing this for years and years and years. You really enjoy the steaks, and your friend really likes a salad bar. It's a massive salad bar with a lot of options. They're not much of a steak person, but they can always find something with the salads that they want to enjoy. You've been doing this for a long time. The restaurant's been in business for almost 50 years, and you've been doing this now for the past 15 to 20, and it's kind of your weekly tradition with this friend of yours. The restaurant gets sold to new owners. Those owners come in and take a look at the menu and the expenses, and they say, you know what? Steaks are kind of pricey. The salad bar is really expensive to maintain with all the different options. We're going to scrap all that, and we're going to serve peanut butter and jelly. Now, a big reason why you and your friend kept going to this restaurant is because of the steaks and the salad bar. And the new owners have said, we're no longer going to offer steaks and a salad bar. Are you obligated to continue patronizing this restaurant with your business if they're not serving the items on the menu that you enjoy? Because when you want a steak, you're probably going to go somewhere to find a steak and not say, well, I guess I'll just have peanut butter and jelly instead. No, you and your friend are going to find a different steakhouse that hopefully is on par or almost as good as the one that you've enjoyed all these years. But ultimately, you're going to find your steak and your salad bar someplace else. And that's really what's going on right now with Star Wars. We're seeing the divisiveness in the fan base, the dropped ratings, the fact that The Acolyte is the first project to get publicly announced that it will not be renewed for a second season, when we've got all these other Star Wars projects that have been announced and floating out there for over 10 years of, oh yeah, we're still going to do this one. There's a chance this might happen. And Acolyte, they just said, no, we're not renewing this for a season 2. That tells you, without coming right out and saying it, just how low the numbers were, how small the support was for this show. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they had these different themes that people don't really expect from Star Wars and they didn't really enjoy. So if you look at how Disney Lucasfilm has completely changed the core values of Star Wars, they've changed the values of their brand to where it doesn't mean anything close to what it used to. In fact, they've done the opposite in a lot of ways of what fans have come to expect. It brings us back to the original question of what is Star Wars? And at this point, because of how much it's been changed, it's fan fiction. I don't know what else to call it, because they've totally done away with the things that brought all these fans to the franchise that we all enjoyed and said, no, we're not doing that anymore. We don't want to do that anymore. And if you don't like the fact that we're doing something completely different that you don't enjoy, that's your fault. And trying to keep track of all these different things that they're doing where they just arbitrarily say, oh, this is like a fan favorite character from the EU. Let's bring that character in and introduce them. Or let's tie this in. Or let's do some key jangling and some member berries with these things that people know, when it doesn't really make sense with timelines or settings or any of these sorts of things. A lot of content creators have been able to make a decent living trying to explain how all this fits together. And a lot of them are even confused. I mean, even Star Wars Theory, who has a really solid channel, and I've enjoyed his content in the sense of, well, actually, if you look at it from this perspective and you take these other factors into account, it still makes sense because of X, Y, and Z. Even he's given up trying to make sense of all this nonsense, and I don't blame him. It's just they've gotten to a point where you can't justify the decisions that they're making within lore. You can't make it all fit together and make sense. So if you're one of those people that feels that way and you say, I can't keep track of all this, it's not all adding up, they just seem to be doing random things for the sake of it, that doesn't make you a horrible person. It doesn't make you a bigot, an ist, an ism, a phobe, or a picky baby. You want things to have some consistency in terms of their thematic elements and the through lines from a story standpoint. And when it's all disjointed and disconnected, it makes it a lot harder to enjoy. It takes you out of the film, out of the show, to where you just don't really care that much anymore. There's much less to get invested in emotionally because those core values that you've come to enjoy are no longer present. And in fact, sometimes you're being told the exact opposite. There's an emotional and logical disconnect that happens in your own brain where you say, you know what? This isn't what I was expecting. It doesn't make sense. Not that some of us aren't open-minded people. I mean, I'm all for some of the concepts that they want to introduce. After all, I, a little while ago, even praised The Last Jedi for trying to say, hey, here's a new idea to think about within this universe. I mean, credit where credit's due. At least it was the attempt to do something different. But when it's done in such a haphazard way without any real thought as to how it can fit within the overall structure of the narrative, it doesn't work. It falls apart. And a lot of people just lose their emotional support for it because they're just like, no, I don't care about this. I don't care about these characters. They're making irrational decisions. They're not following any logic. It's not consistent with what we've come to know. If you really want to do something different, you can introduce new stories and new characters. And that's kind of what we got with The Acolyte. But you can also see how fans responded to that. So at the end of the day, I guess all I can say is that if you're a fan of George Lucas Star Wars, then continue to love it, because it doesn't make you a bad person if you want to watch the original trilogy again, if you want to go back and revisit the prequel trilogy. They're good stories. They've got values that you identify with, which is why you were a fan in the first place, and continue to enjoy those stories that have those values. And if you're a fan of Disney Star Wars, continue to love it. There's something about that that resonates with you that you enjoy, but don't complain when you've got fans of Star Wars from over 12 years back that don't share your enthusiasm, because what we've seen in the most recent projects aren't the same types of stories that we've come to enjoy if we've been a fan of this franchise for a long time. And as far as Disney Lucasfilm is concerned, I know nobody there cares what I have to say, but it might not be a bad idea to take just a few minutes to step back and ask yourselves, who are we as an organization? Who is our target customer, and how well are we reaching them? Because there is a difference between your established fan base that has been sustaining your organization for decades based on the values that you previously had, and the fan base that you're trying to reach that appears to be much, much smaller and does not share the same core values that originally built your company. So it might be a good idea to maybe just think about some things that are a little bit more universally acceptable to the entire fan base, so that you can win back some of your paying customers, continue to sustain your business, and make more content that fans enjoy and want to support. Those are just my thoughts. I'd love to hear some of yours. Give me a like if you found this video entertaining, and subscribe for more videos like this one. And until next time, do what you can do to help someone else's light shine a little bit brighter.